Hello BookTube, Books with Banks back again with another Malazan video, and today I'm going to talk about something I suspect a lot of potential future and even early Malazan fans and readers might be interested in: a recommended reading order. But before getting too far into my recommended reading order, a few notes. Number one, if you enjoy my content, and if you haven't already, it really would mean a lot to me if you could like and subscribe. And then number two, I won't be spoiling anything at all about Malazan in this video, as I want this to be helpful, or a helpful resource for new readers to the series. All that out of the way, here's how I'm going to structure this, how I'm going to approach this. I'll first break this video down into three parts. Part one, an introduction to all of the different series in the Malazan kind of universe. Then in section two, I'll give you a brief rundown of the order and timeline and like the order that I read everything in. And then in section three, I'll go through and I'll list my recommended reading order. And I can have all of these orders in the description below. So here we go. Part one, introduction to the 6 or so different series. Malazan is a series that really consists of 6 separate smaller ones and one loosely related short story. There are 2 separate authors. There's Steven Erikson and Ian C Esslemont, and these 2 men co-created this setting for tabletop role-playing games they played with each other. Some they played in advanced Dungeons & Dragons, but mostly in GURPS. These two, they drafted up ideas for how to write and how to get some of their stories in this world published. They were even working on a film script, and that film script eventually became the first book in one of these series. And I'd say it is easily, hands down, for that reason, this first book of the main series we're going to talk about in a second here, because it started as this collaboration, and it also was one of the first things published or I think the first thing published in the world of Malazan. Easily the best place to start. So what are all of these different series? First, the 2 completed series. Number one, that I'd recommend if you're interested in Malazan, you definitely need to check out this series, as it's the big deal. It's the one everyone kind of goes to. This is Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson. It's these 10 epic volumes, roughly 10,000 pages in mass market paperback. This series starts with Gardens of the Moon, and then Deadhouse Gates is book 2, and then Memories of Ice is book 3, and so on. It continues from there for 7 more books. I recommend reading this and all other series, for that matter, in publication order, at least within the series itself. But then we'll get into it a little later on in parts 2 and 3 of this video, whether or not it's a good idea ever to take a break in between any of these books. Here, I'll try and see if I can't hold them up at once. There's the first 5, and then the next 5. Yeah, so if you want to take a break between any of these to try out any of the other series, maybe where certain things kind of slot in nicely chronologically, or if you just need a break, want a different style, want to see how the other author, how Esslemont does stuff, there are places that I'll recommend that are okay to take that break. You don't need to, but there are places you can kind of split this massive 10-book series up with those other ones. So next we have one of those other series, being the Novels of the Malazan Empire by Ian C Esslemont. This is a 6-book series, closer to 5,000 pages in length. Closer to 5,000 pages in length, in paperback length. Timeline-wise, while the first one of these, called Night of Knives, this one is kind of a prequel of sorts to Erikson's 10-book Malazan Book of the Fallen we just talked about. The other 5, the remaining 5 novels here, they all take place concurrently, roughly with the last 5 books of Erikson's Book of the Fallen. So these are the 5 that kind of take place at the same time as Erikson's final 5. And now some reading orders might suggest that you can find online. They might suggest kind of going back and forth between the two series once you get to that point in Erikson's series. But more on my personal recommendations for that sort of thing later. Continuing with the different, as of yet unfinished series, we'll talk about the Tales of Bauchelain and Korbal Broach novella series by Steven Erikson. So these are 7 dark comedy novellas, which I believe 2 more are planned to be written. And I have a whole video on my channel already breaking down what the series is all about and which of these novellas are my favorites. These are short diversions from the heavier content of Erikson and Esslemont's main series. And for the most part, these take place simultaneously, kind of along with Erikson's Book of the Fallen, with only like a really light risk of spoiling a few teensy tiny world details if you should happen to read any of these before they chronologically happen in Erikson's series. So yeah, that's these novellas. Definitely a side thing, definitely a different tone. These are written by Erikson, again, though, the writer of the main 10 series, not Esslemont, the writer of the 6-book series. Tales of Bauchelain and Korbal Broach. Next up we have, switch back to the other author, Ian Esslemont, with his Path to Ascendancy series. So we have 3 novels here that are shorter than most in the Malazan world, or the Malazan universe. And these 3 are the ones that have been published so far. It's Dancer's Lament, Deadhouse Landing, and Kellanved's Reach, in that order. With a 4th called Forge of the High Mage due out later sometime this year, 2023, I believe in April. I am currently unsure of how many books are planned in this prequel series, but it is roughly a prequel series dealing with, or detailing, the kind of foundational events, conquests, and conflicts of the Malazan Empire in the century or so leading up to Erikson and Esslemont's 2 main 10-book and then 6-book, respectively, longer main series. So yeah, these are very good. A little more on Dancer's Lament later. I want to say something about that. Then, as for prequel series, Steven Erikson is also himself working on a trilogy, a prequel trilogy. And this prequel trilogy is set millennia before the events of any of the other series on this list. This is the Kharkanas Trilogy. The 2 released books currently are Forge of Darkness and Fall of Light. And even though these are chronologically the earliest books in the Malazan timeline, it really would surprise me if any Malazan fans seriously suggested that any new readers start here. While these 2 might be some of my favorites, they're definitely very, very intense reads. And I think you benefit so much from knowing a bit more about what happens in the future in some of these other series. Yeah. So that's the 5th kind of sub-series. And then the 6th and final one we're going to talk about is another, again, this was by Steven Erikson, not Esslemont. Erikson does these. And then another Erikson series. Erikson is more immediately, I believe right now, working on book 2 of his Witness trilogy, which is a sequel trilogy to his Book of the Fallen. And so far, this is the furthest forward on the timeline we go by at least or almost 10 years or so. The first book here, The God Is Not Willing, was just released in 2021, I believe, and from what I hear, Erikson is hard at work getting the 2nd entry completed. So, also, before I move on, brief mention here of a short story called Goats of Glory that I think technically is set in this universe. This was written by Erikson, seemingly takes place during the back half of Erikson's main series, but it's very disconnected and won't really spoil anything. If you ever feel inclined at any point to check it out, just go for it. I believe it was published originally in a collection called The Devil Delivered and Other Tales. It was called something like that. But yeah, not a must-read, but it's fun. It's fine. Anyway, now we're going to get on to part 2. now that we know the various interweaving series we're dealing with here, let's go over the order that I read everything in. So first I read books First I read books 1, 2, 3, and 4 of Erikson's main Malazan Book of the Fallen series. These are in order: Gardens of the Moon, Deadhouse Gates, Memories of Ice, and House of Chains. Then I gave myself a break, actually, and I read the first 4 novellas in Erikson's Bauchelain Korbal Broach novella series. These are in proper publication and reading order, despite how they're published, various collections and whatnot. These are first in here, Blood Follows, then Leaves of Laughter's End, then in this is Worms of Blearmouth, and then the third story in here is the 4th one that you should read of these dark comedy novellas. The 4th one here is The Healthy Dead. So I read these 4 novellas after I read Erikson's first 4 books of his main series. After these, I returned to Erikson's main series by reading Book 5 in Book of the Fallen, Midnight Tides. So now I'm halfway through Book of the Fallen, and then I decided to start trying out some of Ian Esslemont's work. And so I read the first book in his Novels of the Malazan Empire series, that being Knight of Knives, right here. From there, I went back to Erikson and I read books 6 and 7 of Book of the Fallen, The Bone Hunters and Reaper's Gale. After book 7, I decided to take another break from Erikson's main series to read his 5th Bauchelain Korbal Broach novella, and that one is called Cracked Pot Trail. This is one of my favorites, definitely. So, kind of quick check with what I've done here. At this point, I've read this first 7 of Erikson's main Malazan Book of the Fallen. I've read the first book in Esslemont's Novels of the Malazan Empire, and I've read 5 of Erikson's Bauchelain Korbal Broach novellas. So, after Crackpot Trail, from here I started to do a weird thing that I'm not so sure I'd really recommend. I decided to bounce back and forth between Erikson, then Esslemont, Erikson, Esslemont, and so on and so on, and so it went like this. I next read Book 2 of Esslemont's Novels of the Malazan Empire, Return of the Crimson Guard. Then I read Book 8 of Steven Erikson's Book of the Fallen, main series. Then I went back and I read Book 3 of Esslemont's main series, Stonewielder. So you can see back and forth, here we go. And then I read Book 9 of Steven Erikson's Book of the Fallen, Dust of Dreams. And then I read Book 4 of Esslemont's series, Orb, Scepter, Throne. Really cool cover. Love that cover there. And after that, I jumped back from Book 4 of Esslemont to Book 10 of Steven Erikson, The Crippled God, finally finishing his main series here. And then right after that, I read Esslemont's 5th book in his 6-book series, Blood and Bone. And I did this because a lot of this stuff is happening around the same time, and you get hints at and glimpses of what's happening elsewhere in the world during Erikson's main series by reading Esslemont's main series. Needless to say, I was a bit burnt out, though, by the time I finished all of this. So I took a year-long break from all things Malazan, and then when I finally returned to it, I finally finished up Esslemont's 6-book series, 6-book side series, with his book A Sail. But I also, right after I read A Sail, I decided to dive into some of Erikson's other stuff, and I read Book 1 in his Kharkanas prequel trilogy, Forge of Darkness. I also, at some point in there, I read Erikson's 6th novella, The Fiends of Nightmare. It was published around that time. Then, after reading those kind of 3 things around then, I took about a year-long break. I dabbled in other fantasy series, and when I finally returned to Malazan, I returned to focus on Ian Esslemont's prequel trilogy, his Path to Ascendancy series, starting with Dancer's Lament, Deadhouse Landing, and Kellenved's Reach. At the time I read these, I was under the impression they were a trilogy, but now in recent years we know that he has another book coming out soon in the same series, and he has maybe another trilogy or so planned. That's all kind of part of the same Path to Ascendancy series. So yeah, I read these three next, and then finally in 2022, I took a big break then, but in 2022, just last year, I read the three works in all of Malazan that I hadn't gotten to, all three being written by Steven Erikson. And these being, first, the 7th Bauchelain Korbal Broach novella, called Upon a Dark of Evil Overlords. Then I read Erikson's first book in his new Witness trilogy, The Goddess Not Willing. And then, of course, I read the second of Erikson's prequel series, prequel Kharkanas Trilogy, Fall of Light, and I love this book. And as of right now, this is the most recent Malazan I have read. So, there it is, the weird and seemingly random order in which I read everything. I'll put this as well as my recommended reading order down in the description below, but before we get to my recommended reading order, let me briefly explain a couple places where I think I might have gone wrong, or where I didn't help myself enjoy the series. I still loved all of these books, but I might have hindered my experience a little bit. First and foremost, from book 7 of Erikson's main series onwards, I kept bouncing back and forth between Erikson and Esslemont. I do not really recommend this, mostly because I think it gives Erikson an unfair advantage, sort of in the way that we've already, as readers, been with Erikson's writing style and characters and plot lines for 5, 6, or however many books now before starting to jump around a bunch. And so every time I jumped to an Esslemont book, I really just couldn't wait to get back to Erikson stuff because I had so many more books worth of like investment in that series. So I don't think it helped me appreciate what Esslemont was doing on his own, with his own series, as much as I would have if I read more of his stuff kind of in a row by itself. Now I do think it's okay to read some of his series mixed in with Erikson's Book of the Fallen, but definitely not necessarily try to mix it all in together. Yeah. I also regret that I waited so long between book 1 and 2 of Erikson's prequel Kharkanas Trilogy. These are easily two of my favorites now, but as they are a bit more dense, there's some important character information and details of the Kharkanas world and the storyline he's setting up here that could easily be lost between books the longer you wait, and it just makes jumping into that second one then a little bit more difficult. It makes you a little bit more hesitant because, oh no, what if I forgot all of these important things? And then you have to do a little bit more work to kind of jog your memory. So here's, I guess, two separate actual like recommended reading orders I'm going to give you based on my experience and what I've seen other people talk about online. First, kind of the simple one, if you want to read the series separately and not go back and forth at all, I'd recommend this order for just the series, or reading all of the series. First, read Erikson's Malazan Book of the Fallen. Second, read Esslemont's Novels of the Malazan Empire. Third, read Erikson's Tales of Bauchelain Korbal Broach novellas. Fourth, read Esslemont's Path to Ascendancy prequel series. Fifth, I'd say actually read, jump into Erikson's Witness trilogy, however many books are out in that. And then last, but definitely not least, you can jump into the Erikson's prequel Kharkanas Trilogy. Important to note here that this is a recommended order for you to try the first books of in each of these series. So let's say any given book at the first book in any of these series just isn't really doing it for you, then of course feel free to move on to the next one. Second, or my second kind of list here, that kind of incorporates everything and mixes things in a little bit more. Here's my more thorough reading order that I think might provide the best reading experience for anyone eager to read everything and get the most out of Malazan. Here we go. Number 1, I think you should read Gardens of the Moon, Book 1, in Erikson's Malazan Book of the Fallen. Next up, read Deadhouse Gates, Book 2 in Steven Erikson's Malazan Book of the Fallen. Then read Memories of Ice, book 3 in Erikson's series. After that, after these first 3, maybe treat them as a bit of a trilogy, then take a little break to see if the novellas might be for you, because the novellas have to do with some of the characters that you meet in this 3rd book here. So here I'd recommend reading Blood Follows and Leaves of Laughter's End, both of which can be found in this collection. The first 2 BNKB novellas. After that, I'd say go ahead and jump back to Erikson's main series with House of Chains, book 4. This is kind of what we're looking at right now, okay? And then after that, if you enjoyed the 2 novellas that you read so far, then I'd say read the 3rd one of those, Worms of Blearmouth, after book 4 in the main series, but also read the 4th one of those, which is in this collection here. That's The Healthy Dead. So right now we have Gardens of the Moon, The Deadhouse Gates, The Memories of Ice, then 2 novellas being Blood Follows and Leaves of Laughter's End, and back to House of Chains, then 2 more novellas being The Worms of Blearmouth and The Healthy Dead, and then after here, I'd say it's time to read Erikson's 5th book, Midnight Tides. So there, kind of looks like that. This is what we've got right now for getting into the series, and at this point, you'll have read kind of 9 different things. You'll have read the first 5 of Erikson's novels, the first 4 of his novellas. I'm going to set this aside. I'll take pictures of these and kind of just have this order, an image of this order later on. Okay. So next up, the 10th thing I think you should read is after Midnight Tides, Erikson's Midnight Tides. You don't want to get too far behind with Esslemont stuff, so I think it's time to jump into some of his things, and I think it's a good time to read Knight of Knives, his sort of prequel book / his first book in his own series of 6. Knight of Knives comes next. Then, after Knight of Knives, I think you're ready to return to Book of the Fallen and read Erikson's 6th book, The Bone Hunters. And then, after The Bone Hunters, just continue straight on from that into Reaper's Gale, book 7 of Book of the Fallen. Then after that, I think because of very important kind of political things that are happening in the world, I think it's important to jump back to Esslemont and see how he tackles and how he explores and explains what's happening kind of more at the heart of the Empire by reading his 2nd book, Return of the Crimson Guard. Read that right after Reaper's Gale would be my recommendation. So yeah, you've got those 4. Then after that, it's safe to read Toll the Hounds, Erikson's 8th book in Book of the Fallen. And then after Toll the Hounds, we're just going to go straight through and finish up Erikson's main series and read kind of the 2-volume conclusion, Dust of Dreams and The Crippled God. I made the mistake of breaking these 2 up, but they really, I think, should be read back to back. Book 9 and Book 10 of Book of the Fallen. At this point, we've finished Steven Erikson's main Book of the Fallen, and we've read 2 of Esslemont's novels of the Malazan Empire, and we've read 4 of Erikson's Bauchelain Korbal Broach novellas. Okay, so now that we've done that, now it's time to finish up. Esslemont's main series of 6 books, and I think these last 4 go together pretty nicely. So this would be reading, in order, this would be reading book 3 of Novels of the Malazan Empire, Stonewielder, then reading book 4, Orb Scepter Throne. Then we do book 5, Blood and Bone, and finish off Esslemont's Novels of the Malazan Empire with A Sail. And yeah, and even though a lot of this stuff happens during the end of Erikson's series, you won't really be missing anything by saving the reading of these four for after your adventures with Erikson's work. Yeah, there we go. Definitely have this right here. And then after that, I think it's time to catch up on all of Erikson's novellas. So the order of those, the most recent three would be Crackpot Trail, novella 5, then Fiends of Nightmaria, novella 6, and then Upon a Dark of Evil Overlords, novella 7. So yes, I would recommend reading these three after finishing Esslemont's novels of Malazan Empire. You could even mix these in, whenever, if you want, if you're missing Erikson's style. Now from here, we've caught up with all the novellas. We've read Erikson's Book of the Fallen, Esslemont's novels of Malazan Empire, and we only have 3 different series left to cover. Yes, we only have 3 different series left to cover. And now I think it's time to kind of continue with, barring those novellas, continue with Esslemont's work and start reading his Path to Ascendancy, his prequel stuff here. So that's Dancer's Lament, Deadhouse Landing, Kellanbed's Reach again, and Forge of the High Mage is the 4th one that is forthcoming, that should be published in 2023. So you read these, and these kind of in the reading order list I have here are number 24, 25, 26, and 27. You read these next. So you read those next, and then after you read those, then I think it's time to jump into Steven Erikson's sequel series with his Witness trilogy. Only one of those is out right now, but I think after you've read all of this stuff, then I think you're okay to go into The God Is Not Willing, book 1 in the sequel trilogy. The second one, I believe, is called No Life Forsaken. That's forthcoming. I don't think it has a publication date or anything like that yet, but from what I understand, he's hard to work on it. And then the third book is untitled. But yeah, so that'll be this trilogy I'd recommend reading next, or at least starting with this one next. And then finally, last but not least, it's time to read Erikson's prequel trilogy, Kharkanas. That's Forge of Darkness, Fall of Light, and Walk in Shadow is the name of the forthcoming 3rd book in this trilogy. So, last but not least, let's say you want to give this series a try and you start Gardens of the Moon, which I do think is the best place to start. But if you start it and you just bounce off of it and it's not doing it for you, where else would I consider would be good entry points? So I think the following 3 places are kind of the 3 I'd suggest for starting out this series. Of course, as I just mentioned, Gardens of the Moon, easily my number 1 pick. But then my second choice, I'd say read Knight of Knives, being Esslemont's first book, because maybe if you're not really vibing with Gardens of the Moon because of the writing style, you get a different author. And also, while Knight of Knives sort of spoils stuff from the first 2 books of Erikson's series, it's not so much a spoiler if you think of it like either you find out this stuff in Erikson's books or you find it out in Esslemont's books. So it's pretty interesting, fascinating stuff in whichever order that you read it in. But yeah, so Knight of Knives, and it's also a shorter book, and I think that is it's a fine place to start out the series and give things a try. Also, I mentioned I was going to talk about the first Path to Ascendancy book, Dancer's Lament by Esslemont as well, for the same sort of reason of if you're just not a fan of Erikson's style right away, you might be more a fan of Esslemont's. That holds true with this, but also I think Dancer's Lament is just a very focused and really, really tremendous story. I would be surprised if somebody started their journey with Malazan with Path to Ascendancy and didn't fall in love with Dancer's Lament. Even though, sure, they're missing some context, but it's just like all the bigger reveals of other series. They'll still be there, and some things mysteries that you have to wait a few books in other series to find out. In Dancer's Lament, they're presented to you earlier. So yeah. I'd say Gardens of the Moon, Knight of Knives, and Dancer's Lament are the best 3 places to start the series. Of course, if you want to read anything in whatever order you want, go for it. There's nothing stopping you. If any series sound interesting, and I didn't really go over stories or like themes of the different series here, I can do that in a future video if anyone would like. But I figured this video would be going on a little bit long anyway. So yeah, that does it. That was a bit of a longer one. I hope that makes some kind of sense. I'll try to, edit images in here and post lists down in the description below to try and help clarify things, so you don't have to necessarily go back to the video and keep watching, just to make sure you have the order right from everything I was talking about. And yeah, please let me know down below in the comments if you're curious to start reading this series, if this was helpful or not, if you've read it in different orders that either really helped or you think maybe might have hurt your experience. I'd love to hear anything like that. Thank you as always so much for watching. Have a good day.